Thank you, Portia. I'm fired up already. We are not powerless against porn.
Amen.
So, Dannah, let's jump right into this conversation. How has porn infiltrated your home?
Well, last year, Bob and I released a book that kind of tells our story about his battle with
Mm,
pornography, which became our battle with pornography when we got married. And one of the reasons, Erin, that we decided to tell a story that at one point in our lives, we both said, we will never tell this story. I mean, we were adamant.
mm,
This is our private story. You knew about it. You were a friend. We weren't
yep.
hiding it from our inner circle, people that could help us, but we just really didn't want to be public about it. What it came
Yeah,
down
I would
to
actually say
was,
Bob's struggle with porn became my struggle with porn in a totally different way than yours, but he's somebody
yeah,
that I love and it has been a battle. So there have been many of us in that fight.
exactly, exactly. And it does affect so many hearts and lives. But for Bob and I,
Mm,
one of the reasons we decided to tell the story was that he was a baby when the battle began. He was
mm,
12 years old when he remembers finding pornography in an attic in his family's barn. And
mm,
the memory is so vivid, he could tell you, the dust particles in the air. He can still kind of see them and breathe them. And
mm,
he remembers the pictures. Now, I don't, I, it's funny because about that same age, I was 12 or 13 when I saw pornography for the first time. My little brother, probably 8 or 9 years old, came to me. I was babysitting and he said, I found some bad pictures. And he threw some
mm,
dirty, muddy um, pornography in my hands. And I mean, I didn't know what
mm,
to do with them. So I held on to them in my bedroom until my parents came home and immediately said, well, look what my brother found. And I
mm.
still remember those pictures that I saw. I didn't like leaf through it,
Yeah,
but the pictures I saw are in my head to this day.
yep.
Now, the
Seared.
difference is
Yep.
the difference is I told my parents, Bob didn't tell
Mm,
his.
yeah.
Parental conversation shut that thing down for me and my brother. No parental conversation began a lifelong battle for my husband, and that is
Mm,
not uncommon. So
mm,
Bob and I have been called to sound an alarm for parents. We don't want any marriage to endure what ours has. We're talking decades of figuring it out and fighting it out until he can walk in sexual integrity. We've both been victims of
yeah.
something that started when he
Mm,
was just a little boy. And might I say, a lot has happened with pornography since we found magazines in the barn attic and
mm.
my brother found them in a gutter in the neighborhood.
Yeah, in a weird way, as a parent raising four sons right now, our baby is 5, our oldest is about to turn 16. Part of me wishes I was raising boys in the day where you had to go actually purchase the magazine or rifle through the rafters and find it because a lot
Yep.
has changed. There probably is still porn tucked in old barn attics, but that's not the primary way it's getting into the eyeballs of our kids. It comes into our homes willingly or unwillingly through our devices. And so thanks for sharing your story, Dan. I wanted to share just a little bit of mine. I mean, Jason and I try to parent eyes wide open, though there are some things we shelter our kids from developmentally. That's not our primary tool as parents. We try to be on the offensive, not the defensive. And so it wasn't like I had never talked to my kids about porn, and I'd heard that statistic that Portia gave us many times before that 11 was the first age of exposure. And I got to say, I had a lot of pride about it because I thought,
Hmm.
won't happen in my family. I'm making the right decisions. My kids don't have cell phones. My kids are going to be much older. And I hoped and prayed it wouldn't happen at all in my house with my kids, but then I did. And one of my boys was 11, and I'm not going to tell you which boy. It doesn't matter. It's his story to tell when he gets older, but he was 11 and he invited a friend over for the night. And we want to be that house. We want to be the house where kids want to come. We're intentional about that.
Hmm.
But at
Yeah.
age 11, so that would have put them in fourth or fifth grade. I didn't even think to ask that boy, did he bring a cell phone?
Yeah.
Which was naive, terribly naive on my part. My sons didn't have a cell phone. And we have since instituted a policy where no cell phones go upstairs. And we ask kids when they come over to put their cell phone on a certain counter. We have designated for that. We've got chargers there, so they want to put their phones there. But what I remember is I went upstairs the next morning after that sleepover, and that boy's cell phone was sitting on the bed.
Hmm.
And As I said, it hadn't even occurred to me that he had a phone. My phone didn't have a phone yet, and that phone was just playing music. There was nothing on the phone in that moment that made me think, "Oh no, my kid's been up here looking at porn," except for the Holy Spirit. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew instantly in that moment
Mm.
that something was terribly wrong, and my heart sunk, my stomach turned, my mouth's getting a little dry just thinking about it because I knew an evil had been unleashed inside the mind and heart of my 11-year-old boy. I mean, hadn't even started puberty. We were not thinking that we needed to address sexuality in those terms yet. And so I waited until the other boy went home, and I just asked. I said, "Buddy,
Yeah.
I noticed there was a phone upstairs. Can you tell me what you guys were looking at?" And
Mm.
that boy my son who clearly was A, afraid he was going to get found out, but B, was also deeply conflicted and a bit traumatized, he began to wail. I mean, wail and cry and
Mm.
sob and talk about what a bad kid he was. And
Mm.
it was heartbreaking. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment because the enemy won some ground that day, that night that I didn't want him to win in my kid's life.
What'd that feel like for you, Erin?
I felt really sad. You know, I I I know that God is the creator of sex, and I hope that my boys have healthy sex lives when they grow up and are married. I hope they enjoy their wives' bodies as God designed. I did not want my 11-year-old boy to see those. And what you described with Bob is what was our experience. The years have gone by, and we bring it up often because it's now become a teaching moment for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And he will say every time, "I can close my eyes and see those images
Yeah.
immediately. They're right
Right.
there in vivid detail." And so I felt sad. I
Yeah.
felt this heavy weight. I feel sorry that I pray that the Lord will erase those images from his mind. He hasn't yet. But I also felt like this porn problem is too big for me just to contain. I need a
Yeah.
different strategy. So we pivoted
Well,
at
and
that moment.
his response was, I think, indicative of a first exposure to pornography response, which is appropriate. He was
Mm,
emotional. He was distraught. I was reading The Guardian recently, and a 7-year-old boy who'd been exposed to pornography, he wasn't looking for it. Let me read to you what he said to the
mm,
adult. "There's a naked picture. She's trying to run away. It's not her fault. She doesn't want it." His
mm.
spirit knew how horrific this was. Your son's
Yeah.
spirit knew how horrific this was. And with more and more exposure, we become more complacent. We're not horrified by it. Today, we kind of
Hmm.
want you to be horrified by it. We want you to
Yeah.
be worried about it to the point where you say, listen, this is if they have that first experience, that first exposure, it really is a crossroads to where they're going to enter into a conversation to be discipled by you as a parent in their sexuality, or they're going
Mm.
to enter into a secret world that can take their spirits and
Yes.
their hearts away from people and away from God. So we're not messing around. We're not playing today.
Well,
Um,
because that's the enemy's tactic. A, let me isolate them enough that I can get them to fall into this sin trap. And with
yeah.
porn so readily available, that is a much easier step to accomplish. It's just, well, my kids go to a school where very much of their work is on iPads. There's a lot of controls on that, but technology native kids can navigate around those pretty easily. So step
Yes.
one is get them
So
isolated
easily.
enough that they fall into the trap. Then step two is isolate them by telling them they can never own up to this because they
Yes.
are bad, as my son said, or they've done something bad, or no one will understand. And so, as you said, and as what happened with Bob at age 12, that can put them on such a long and hard path of
Yep.
isolation, destruction, addiction,
Yep.
which we don't want to see our kids on that
Well,
path.
Erin, you did the right thing. And I really
Mm,
want to underscore this. You asked. You asked. You
mm,
opened the conversation. And that's important because one study shows that I think it's something like 71% of teens will either conceal their online activities from their parents. They might delete a browser history. They might lie about their behavior, what they've done. They might even have a secret social media account, something that leads them
Yep.
to that doorway. I mean, it may be at that point. And those are potential breeding grounds for shame. And shame often leads to anxiety and depression. It always leads to
Mm.
addiction. It is one of the greatest feeders of addiction. Aaron Davis, you stopped the shame in its tracks when you asked. And I think a lot of parents are afraid to do that. They're afraid of what they'll hear. They're
Yeah.
afraid they could create more curiosity and actually create a problem.
Yes.
They're afraid they won't know what to say. They're afraid that they'll create shame if their kids did see
Yep.
porn. Let me tell you something. You don't create it, you just bring it into the light. So let me give you a
Mm-hmm.
Bible verse to combat that kind of parenting. I'm thinking of 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. You said a
Mm.
moment ago, in my heart, I knew something wasn't right. You said that was the Holy Spirit. Aaron, talk about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take you back to a prayer Mary Cassian taught me to pray. She also raised four. Oh, sorry, Mary, I'm giving you extra sons. 3 sons. I have four. And she began to pray when they were young that if there was sin in their life, the Lord would expose it. So she didn't always have to be on a witch hunt, sneaking through their stuff and all of that. She trusted that the Lord would expose it. And he did over and over again. And I've seen him do that with my boys. And I had no physical evidence to believe that my kid had been looking at porn. I had no physical evidence to believe other than knowing that it's a curiosity factor. I didn't even know if that kid had internet connection, but I knew as well as I knew my own name that they had looked at something they weren't supposed to look at. And that was the Holy Spirit. And I've seen the Spirit do that many times with my kids. Just to ask, press, ask again.
Yeah.
Ask the question this way. And I didn't say, did you and your friend look at porn? I said, did you and your friend look at some pictures of women? And that was all it took.
Mm,
And we do have to follow the promptings of the Spirit. Otherwise, we could drive ourselves crazy
yeah.
and shut down all technology. In which case, I don't know how our kids are going to know how to function in the world. They're not going to develop
Right.
a discernment muscle. And when they pass a
Hmm.
billboard that's pornographic, what are they going to do? So we do have to abide in this and all things. So it was, as the Spirit always is, it was a whisper. It wasn't a yell,
Mm,
but it was wiser than
I
I
love that.
am. It knew things I didn't know. He, not it. He knew things I didn't know, and he
Right.
dropped them into my heart, and I tried to just listen to his voice.
Yeah. We've got to listen to the Spirit's voice on this one. Aaron, your son was introduced to porn, and one of the top 10 ways most kids are introduced to porn. I pulled a list
Mm,
together for us today, and I want people to know so they can check in these cracks. These might be cracks in
mm-hmm.
your home. Because listen, like when we were kids, you had to seek porn out, but now porn is
Yep,
hunting you down. It's a $13
absolutely.
billion sex entertainment industry. That's what they call themselves. I call it porn. And it's succeeding in their efforts to convert a whole generation into lifelong, what they would consider customers. Um,
And I think we've thought
we,
historically of porn as a man problem. And what you need to know if
yeah.
you're listening
Oh,
is porn is hunting your daughter down.
yeah.
Porn is hunting your son down. Porn is hunting your babies. We're talking about babies, 11 and 12
Yeah.
years old, not yet pubescent, and learning about sexuality through these images. So we should be on
Well,
high
we
alert.
often get letters at True Girl, the ministry I run for tweens and their moms, of girls who've been exposed at ages 5, 6, 7.
Mm.
So you gotta close up these cracks. Here they are.
Okay,
And
let's bring
listen.
it
These are
down.
the
They're learning the alphabet. They're learning the alphabet at age 5.
yeah.
And they're looking at pornographic images like that should make us so angry as
Yes,
parents,
it
grandparents,
does.
people in the church, because that's intentional. It's war.
It
I'm
is.
sorry, I'm
And
getting
we are
fired
going to
up.
be women that say, not on my watch. Not on my watch.
Absolutely.
Okay, here are the top 10 ways creators of porn target children. Now, some of these aren't necessarily the ways the purveyors are targeting them, but this is how they're getting to your kids.
Mm,
One is a friend's device. Case in point, Erin just shared with you a story, right?
yep.
Two is a friend's house.
Mm,
So there again, you're not there for the Holy Spirit for you to see the phone playing music or a screen that's been opened. you've got to have these open conversations so you know your own
That was my
devices.
Dannah, by the way, that was my first exposure to porn. I was probably 15, staying the night at a friend's house.
Yep.
We went over to another friend of a friend's house, and there were magazines in the cabinet, and that was
Yeah.
my first exposure at a friend's house.
Yep. The number 3 way that they're seeing their pornography for the first time is your devices. Now, listen, if you have a laptop or a phone without something like Covenant Eyes on it to
Mm,
screen or block, or I mean, there are a myriad of options out there, but if you're not using screening tools on your home system or on your private systems, your kids are vulnerable to that. So
yeah,
you don't necessarily have
naive.
to have your device locked down to where they can't get to things, but you need to have it at least locked down to where there's accountability software that tells you when somebody has used that device to get to things. And then you know to
Hmm.
open up the conversation. So careful with those. Number 4, school laptops or tablets. What many parents don't know is that your school often has a safety feature that is on the Wi-Fi of the school system. And as soon as you remove that laptop or that tablet from the school Wi-Fi and you get on the Wi-Fi at the cafe or at home, that security is gone.
Yeah. And let's not make this about what it's not. This is not about what type of school your child is in. No,
Mm-mm.
almost no matter what type of school your child is in, there is a technology element to their schooling because there will be a
Yeah.
technology element to their vocation eventually. So we can't make this about what kind of school your kid goes to because as long as they're connecting, there's a
Yeah.
risk.
Yep. So what are we on here? Number 5, social media. We're talking,
Hmm.
of course, TikTok, of course, Instagram, of course, YouTube. But did you know Pinterest is one of the top places the teenagers and tweens are first seeing pornography? Your social media
Mm-mm.
apps are very dangerous. And I want to say this, before the age of 12, it's not even legal for your child to be on social media. It's not. So why do
Mm.
they have an account? If they have an account before that age, the government has an act that defines the fact that you have to give your email address, private information out to get on social media, and you are not legally allowed to do that before the age of 12. And so if you're doing it, that means the government has said your brain is probably not ready for whatever this doorway you're about to walk through it you're walking
Mm.
through. So
Delay,
be really
delay, delay.
careful. Delay. Gaming, live
Hmm.
streaming and apps. Gaming, many parents would never even imagine. I remember one of the chilling things that happened for me when my son was, he was younger, of course, he's 30 now, but he was googling for codes that he could use to get further along in the gaming, and I happened to be standing right behind him, and an ad popped up that I knew had sensual language on it. He wouldn't have known that language, but it was right there for
Mm.
my little 11-year-old son. Watch out for the
Yep.
gaming. Google Images, cute kid hashtags. This is where the purveyors are not playing fair because they study the hashtags. They find out what the kids are following. They make
Mm.
porn trails for the kids using those hashtags.
Mm.
Library computers, again, not always locked down. And then fan fiction pages. If you don't know what that is, fan fiction, the most popular would be 50 Shades of Grey. Fan fiction is when people get online and they write stories for one another. And I have counseled a myriad of high school and college age girls through where they're reading fan fiction and writing fan fiction of a horrific pornographic nature. And under the age of 12, fan fiction is called lemon stories. They give it a nice, cute name so that
Mm.
it sounds innocent, but that's pornography for kids under the age of 12 being written by other kids under the age of 12. These are the top 10 windows that kids are first getting their first exposure to pornography. Shut them down in your
Yep.
home.
I've only recently been made aware of pornographic cartoons, to which people will say, "Oh, they're not people, so it's not porn," but they're very pornographic. And
Yeah.
so, Scripture warns us our enemy is crafty. So it shouldn't surprise us that he comes up with these methods, but we should fight back. So I like how you describe those as cracks in your home or your family. Dannah, what should parents do to protect their children? They have the information. What next?
Yeah. I think there's three things. One is pay attention. So pay attention to what's happening. Read about this, learn about it,
Mm.
be informed, learn about filters and accountability software and software that'll block this all together. Number two, talk about it. That's what is so powerful about your story, Erin, is that you entered into the conversation. You weren't afraid. And you should really start this conversation when children are about 5 or 6 years old. And you're saying, well, how do I have that conversation with a 5 or 6 year old? That sounds really mature. There's a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It's not a Christian book, but it's a great book. And it basically has entered us into a conversation kind of like stranger danger, right? You don't want to
Mm.
tell your 5-year-old about what bad people do when they steal a child, but you can teach them about stranger danger. You can also tell them there are good pictures on the internet, there are bad pictures on the internet. If you see
Yeah.
one you think is bad or makes you feel bad, you need to tell me because that's something I need to help you with. What a great tool,
Mm.
right? And then number
Yeah.
three, use technology to your advantage. Find out
Mm.
how to use the technology so that you can keep your kids safe rather than just saying, hey, here's a computer and use it. You've got to get educated on how to use internet filtering and internet accountability.
Yeah, I actually want to walk back something I said earlier in this episode. I was a little bit dismissive of the filters, and the filters can play a big role. My point is that just using filters isn't going to disciple your child's heart and
No,
mind about this.
right.
And I do know that my kids who have never known a world without internet, I can't rely on what I can figure out to be
Yes,
bulletproof
exactly.
because they're so much better at it. So, Dannah,
That's
help us with
right.
the difference between internet filtering and internet accountability. In your opinion, which one works better?
Well, I think it's depending on age. Internet filtering is when you can actually block things. You could block anything you wanted. You could
Okay.
say, I don't want my children ever to watch anything about fat. I don't want them to look up clothing. So you could block clothing, right? You could
Mm.
block anything you want with a filtering software. Internet
Okay.
accountability doesn't block those things, but it provides a report to you as a parent that says your child looked up fashion and clothing today. And so you
Mm.
know what they're seeing, and it provides prompts for you to have conversations. Um, the question is the age and stage of your child. When your child is under the age of
Yeah.
12 or 13, I would say go for the filter. They don't need to see that stuff. A lot of their homework isn't requiring them to look up things that would bump into problems for their homework, So filter it, keep it away from them.
Well,
But
you're
as they
so
grow
right. Like
older,
just looking up clothes right now, a lot of the girls in middle school age want to
yeah,
wear, like
right,
workout clothes for
yeah,
their clothes. And just looking up clothes, you can very quickly stumble onto pornographic images. So that's a
yeah.
filter I might not have thought of. That's
Or music videos. The music videos today are really very often not just sexual, but
mm,
transgressive or violent in nature. They're not good. So there's a
mm,
lot of things that you want to just filter out. When they're 13, 14, 15, all the way into high school, at some point you need to help them build the muscle of their own discernment and their own self control. And so I think you switch over to an internet accountability software so that they
mm-hmm,
can have the accountability of you checking in on them, but they're able to build the muscle of saying no. And when they go
mm-hmm,
off to college or into their own life, they're not going to have you filtering their stuff. So they have to
right.
learn that skill. And I think if you teach them that skill at an appropriate stage and age, that's going to have the best long term mental, spiritual, and emotional health for them.
It's really good. I really love that idea of having something that helps you ask informed questions. One
Yeah.
of my kids just was at church camp for this weekend, and the children's pastor texted all the parents, like, ask your kid about this, this, and this. And it was so
Yeah.
helpful because I had some questions. So if you have those reports coming back to you, you can say, hey, I noticed you've been searching a lot for yoga pants.
Yeah.
What sites have you been to? Have you seen anything that you think counts as porn? It's good to be informed.
Yeah. Or why are you looking for yoga pants? Start with that. Why?
Right. Yeah.
Erin, I
There you
want to
go.
know, I love how you checked in with your son. That was awesome. How does a parent do regular check-ins effectively? What does that look like? At what rhythm? Advice on that.
Well, I want to say humbly that I am not an expert parent, but I can certainly tell you what we do. And I told you, we've decided when it comes to porn, we're going to go on the offensive, not the defensive. The world is trying very, very hard to control the narrative for my sons. And so I'm not going to be passive about it. And so we talk about it fairly often. Now, as I said, my sons are 5 to 15, so there is a range, but we have the same conversation every time our kids go to a friend's house. And I will say, we do limit which friends they can stay the night with for this
Yeah.
specific issue. There are friends that they can go play basketball with for a little bit after school, and we always say we'd rather have them here. But when they do go to a friend's house, we ask a set of questions every time, and they know the answers to them. And one of those questions is, what do you do if you see a picture of naked people? And they know the answer is, I immediately, and we tell them, you can make up an excuse. You can say you don't feel good if you're embarrassed. And we will say, he's afraid he's going to throw up. We'll be right there. And then we follow up with, what if they tell you you will get in trouble if you tell that you saw those images? Because we know that especially if kids are being groomed for abuse, that often they can make the child feel like they've done something wrong. And they know, even my little guy will say, I won't be in trouble. They will be in trouble. And that's right. We want them to know that you're not going to be in trouble because a big person showed you something you weren't supposed to look at. That big person will be in trouble, but that's okay. And so alarmingly, go ahead.
I just heard of a mom yesterday that said, we have a secret word and a secret emoji that my kids can text to me. They can call me and say a secret word. They have a secret emoji. And she said, I go mom mad on my kids when that happens. And we know that the scenario is that my kid is going to pretend they don't want to leave. And I'm going to be the crazy mom who's overreacting and says, you get yourself home now. Or if they use the second code word, I'm coming to get you right now. And so it puts the kid in a place where it's not really going to look like their fault or they're telling, but they've already told. They've already told with the code word that they don't feel safe, that there's pornography or something in the area that they want to get rescued from.
Love it. Love the secret emoji. Gosh, emojis are another, emojis have been sexualized. And we don't have to overcompensate either. I mean, my kids don't think I'm going to sick the police on people every time they're exposed to something, but they do know I'm going to engage and I'm not going to wait and I'm not going to ask follow-up questions. My mom did that with me. I didn't have to use it very often, but I knew that if I called my mom and said, I need you to come get me, she would make up a story and she would say either some things have family, we need Erin, or Erin called me, she's not feeling well, and she took all the pressure off of me, and I'm so grateful. So why is this important? Because some parents aren't that worried about porn. In fact, they fall into a growing number of people who don't think it's a sin. In fact, a growing number of people who think that porn is normal and even healthy sexual expression. So you can't know just because I go to church with these people or just because I sit by them at the basketball game that their house is going to be a safe haven. So it really does have to be a conversation between you and your kid and an ongoing conversation. It's not a one and done. You know, that's been a cultural joke, the talk that parents sit down and have a single talk with their kids about sex. No, you need to be having the talks. And you need to, Deuteronomy 6 gives us this model. You talk about it when you're on the way. It's talking about truth, but we're talking about truth here. You're talking about on the way and then on the road, and you put it on the doorpost of your home. You got to be talking about it ongoing. You can't just check that box as a parent.